Well, thanks for joining in, everybody. It's so good to have you all here. I'll leave that poll up on the screen a little bit longer, but pleased that you can all join us for Agile Workspace Structures in Wrike. On the line, in the session with us today, we've got Maria Novoselova, who's a senior customer tech training instructor. She'll be in the session today helping us answer some questions. There's myself, Alex Homer, customer success and strategic program lead based out of APJ. And of course, we've got the wonderful Brett Bellin, professional services engagement manager. I'll let him do a proper introduction of himself in a moment. Now, what are we doing today? Well, we're talking about Agile workspaces and putting together an ideal workspace, I guess, in Wrike and everything that kind of comes with it. It is a two-part session. The session will run for a total of, 80 minutes. So two 40-minute parts. Today, we'll be looking at Wrike knowledge base, Agile fundamentals, configuring a workspace structure, and cross-tagging and handling backlogs. In part two, in a couple of days' time, we'll be looking at effort and story points management, Kanban board and style management, Scrum sprint configurations, and hybrid Agile fall, I should say. Now, before we get into that, though, I want to take a moment here to talk about one of our customers. You might have heard of them, Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon came with some challenges around workflow complexities, having insufficient project visibility, and slow decision-making that kind of came with it. So they utilized Wrike to ultimately help them with their Agile work environment, make it their single source of truth, prioritize their tasks and manage their projects better, and of course, having that cross-functional collaboration. The result, efficiency and productivity, better decision-making, cost savings, and reduced burnout essentially as well. We're pretty proud of the fact that Jeff Hartlib, project director there, has come back saying with the implementation of Wrike, we've been able to bring on more projects with the same amount of people because we've been able to be more efficient. Some pretty incredible stories there, and we're pleased to hear that from Jeff, but how do we go about it? Well, at this point, I want to hand it over to the one and only Brett Bellin. Brett, thanks for joining on with us today, and looking forward to having you take us through. But tell us a bit more about who you are.
Thanks, Alex, and hi, everybody. My name's Brett. I've been at Wrike in our professional services department a little over, 6 years and change now. Worked with all sorts of teams, small and large, marketing, IT, PMOs, all over the place, different use cases. And in my previous role, I worked at another software company on an Agile team, on a Scrum team. So have a good idea from historical use of actually being on a Scrum team and seeing how that works, and also how Wrike works, how teams use Wrike, what are some of the kind of pros and cons, wins and losses, if you will, what are some of the best ways to set up your configuration. That's what I do as a professional service consultant here, is guide people on kind of recommendations and how to set up your account, what are the best ways to do it, what are some of the ways that you can get the most value out of the system. So we're going to be going through kind of some basic overview of how to use Wrike, how to build an Agile use case in Wrike. We'll talk about a few different styles of Agile methodologies in here. I do want to kind of call out going into this that I'm going to assume that there's some basic knowledge around Agile and some terminology when I use a term like sprint review or sprint planning or a backlog, things like that. I'm going to assume that everybody has a little bit of knowledge, but if you're unclear on anything, I don't want to leave anybody behind. We do have a chat. You can use that, a Q&A. You can use the Q&A session, and either myself, Alex, or Maria will answer in that session. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and we are going to get started. Alex,
amazing. Thanks, Brett. And I can confirm that I can see your screen. And I want to also make sure that people understand that, yeah, please, if you have any questions, put them through the Q&A. If I could find a moment to interrupt Brett, I will. So take it away, Brett. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. All right, so you should be seeing my screen now, and I'm in my personal space. And the first thing I wanted to kind of call out is that we do have some pre-built material for you that you all can access and follow along. I'm going to be using both the initial material and some kind of variations of it. To get to this, what I'm going to need you to do is go ahead and create a space. Now, you do need to be an admin in your account to do what I'm doing. If you're not follow along, and you can get an admin from your account to build this for you. But we are going to be building out one of our space templates in here. And what you're going to be looking for is the word knowledge base. Excuse me, I'm going to give everybody a second just to kind of keep up if you'd like. But we are looking for this knowledge base here. You can go ahead and click on the preview button once you find that. And again, I like to slow down and repeat this so nobody gets lost behind, but plus button in the top right, assuming you are on light speed. If you're not on light speed, by the way, that's our new UI. I think everybody should be, but there's a few accounts that are kind of haven't turned it on yet. But assuming you're on light speed, plus button, space, and knowledge base is what we're looking for. Click on that, hit select. It's going to create a brand new workspace for you. So that's going to go ahead and create a space with a number of folders, and we have a bunch of information in there, one of which is the one that we're going to be using today. So this is building right now. It's going to take a moment. So on your side, just give it a moment. It's going to create a few hundred tasks because we have a bunch of information in here. We'll probably be changing this in a little bit in the future, and we do update it from time to time. But what I'm getting to is going to be in our sample blueprint section. So you'll see it starts to populate. And if you see it start to populate, as mine is, what we are looking for is number 7, hybrid agile waterfall. And I'll give everybody kind of a moment as this populates. And actually, I'm even going to jump to one of my other, because I already had a knowledge base set up. So I want to make sure I have that one that I'm going to plan on using. But I've customized mine a little bit. What you're really looking for, though, again, is either Wrike examples, or you can even search for it to find sample blueprints. And inside of that, number 7, hybrid agile waterfall. And underneath that even is going to be this O2 development. This is what we're looking for. So you can search directly in your search bar up top if you'd like. We are looking for this O2 development sprints here. And I did see a question on, since you're not an admin, if you will get a recording. Alex, will they get a recording after this?
You absolutely will there. Yes, indeed.
Perfect. Thank you. So yes, you will. All right. And then as we jump into this, just to declutter my space, make it a little easier for everybody to follow, I've cross-tagged my that folder directly into one of my other spaces we're going to be using. So just know that that's what's happened, but it's the same folder that we're going to be talking through right here. Now, just a quick overview of these folders, and then I'll start diving into them. Everybody I've run into, and again, I've been here at Wrike as a consultant for a little over 6 years. I've seen, I don't know, dozens of teams use Agile and Wrike, and nobody's done it the same. I guess that's kind of the definition of Agile, and kind of one of the benefits, right, is that it's a flexible work system. So everybody's a little bit same. So the terminology tends to vary somewhat. Some teams use sagas above epics. Some teams use epics. Some teams use user stories. A lot of phrases that might be, typical to you are not always typical to others. And so I've kind of tried to generalize this a little bit. But we'll be talking a little bit about epics today and how that kind of works in conjunction with your actual workflow here. Our backlog, our current sprints, our completed sprints. Sometimes teams call out bugs separately. Sometimes there's a bugs backlog. Sometimes there's bug sections within the sprints themselves. But again, kind of varies. And then our sprint template, which I'll be talking about momentarily as well. And again, obviously, this one varies a ton. This is kind of a basic example of what this might look like. Now, we're going to get into some hybrid stuff later on. We'll get into some Kanban stuff later on. But for right now, we're focusing on kind of a basic sprint structure and methodology. Now, kind of taking a quick step back, some teams kind of operate more on like a ticketing style, in which case I typically find that you don't really need the epics. Bugs are coming in, or things you just need to change quickly or fix, and we can kind of skip over the epics portion in those cases sometimes. But in many teams that are trying to build something new or build something large, we really need to kind of call out everything, right, that we are going to be building. And so this is where I have my 00 or 00 epics features, and this is where we maybe build our epics. we have variations. Sometimes we add sub items in there for development and testing if you wanted to break things down by different folders. Sometimes we have features over here, stories over here, etc. Sometimes we have bugs included, as I mentioned earlier. But the general idea is saying we are building this epic one. We are building this thing here. Again, could be a feature, could be a story, etc. But we are building this thing, and everything within that is going to be everything that needs to get built as part of that feature, let's say, that we're building, or as part of that epic in this case, needs to live within here. Now, this is more of like a waterfall style in the sense that we are just calling out everything that needs to happen, and we're not breaking it down by sprints yet. But the idea here is this is where we can kind of plan out the whole thing, right? It could be 100 tasks that we need to get done in order to mark Epic 1 completed. Now, within that, we also... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you there. Got a bit of a question on how do we determine what's the difference between a standard epic or a sprint, given that they're both projects or folders? Like, is there something that distinguishes them
Good
differently?
question. I don't have it in our knowledge base example, but that would typically be something where we actually use different item types here like this. If you're not familiar with item types, I would say we're going to have to talk a little bit separately about custom item types. But generally speaking, I would see epics as one custom item type project, sprints as a second type. And I can make some changes for our setup session on Thursday. That's a good call out. This is a little bit of an older one before we had custom user type or item types. I would say tasks, sort of similar. We might have features as one item type. We might have user stories. We might have bugs, risks, change requests, etc. Could be different item types if need be, or at minimum using a custom field to identify what's considered a sprint, what's considered an epic. Good question, Alex.
Thanks for that, Brett.
All right, now going through this, we build out our epics, and then generally speaking, once we have all of our items listed out, we also go and we cross tag those items from our epic into our actual sprint development cycle. Now, usually that means we start by selecting everything and adding to the backlog. You can see next. And if you think about it like this is a cross tag allows a one single task or project to live in multiple locations. This would allow us for an item to stay permanently in the epic that it corresponds with, while simultaneously also, say, living in the backlog or living in a current sprint or living in a completed sprint. That way you still keep track of which epic it aligns with, while also seeing where it's at in the development life cycle. So in this case, I would usually just go in and again, select all if you're in list view. Most people these days are using table view. So I might see click on the first one, hold shift on your keyboard down to the bottom one and add to location right up top here. Again, assuming you're using Lightspeed, and add that to our backlog. And in this case, I might have a few backlogs, so apologies there, but I already have it done. So most of you will not see as 7 or so because I just have a bunch of examples in here. Now, once it's living in those other locations, I like to kind of show this still in the old list view, but you can see if I turn on in list view, I can still turn on folder names, and this will show those tags of where things live. And in this case, you can see feature 1 was added to sprint 1, feature 3 added to sprint 2. And I'll talk about the thumbs up and the percentages in a little bit and the colors. But the idea here is that these can now live both in the epic, and you'll see here as I click into sprint 4, you'll see feature testing and feature 10 momentarily. And there we go, feature 10, and feature 4 might be marked completed or something. I forget where I did with it. But the idea here is it allows us to see items in multiple locations at the same time, right? And keep it in the epics while it moves through our backlog, sprints, completed sprints, etc. Now,
I want to take a moment here, Brett. Sorry to interrupt you again. I just wanted to take a moment because I know that this is going to become really powerful later when we start talking about Agile. What was the Wagile, I guess, kind of workflow / meets Agile. So the cross tagging for folks that are in the session today, like take note of the cross tagging piece. This is really important. So wanted to call that out there for everybody, Brett.
Thanks, Alex. And if you're not familiar with it too much, let's say we added another item to Epic 1 in this case, and now we need to add it to our backlog. We can either individually do, like we can click on that single item and we can use the plus button up here to tell it to live in another location. And I might say backlog. I think I'm probably going to have to say, I'll at least look through these real quick. One moment. Is this the right one? Nope. Well, I'm going to do it the other way because it's going to be a little bit faster for me on the fly. But if we were to add this, you can just come in here as well and add to location. Actually, I'm going to have the same problem. I have too many backlogs. I'm so sorry. Should have cleaned those up beforehand. But you get the idea. We are adding it to this other location. Again, it usually goes into backlog, and then I will talk through backlog moving forward. Now, these are all of our items in backlog. Again, here you see a few that are tagged into those epics. We sometimes don't have everything assigned with an epic, right? If we do have tickets or something that aren't assigned to an existing epic, we could build epic 4 and tag them in, or we can still add tasks directly into our backlog. An item does not, a task or a project does not have to live within an epic per se. Just generally speaking, if we're building an epic style, saga style, etc., we want to obviously account for that. Now, from our backlog, I'm going to talk a little bit more on one of my other examples down here, one of my more customized ones just to kind of show you. But in our backlog here, we have the ability to see a whole lot of data. Now, this is typically what I'm going to see is something along these lines. I have a backlog custom table set up here. I have all of my list of things that are backlogged currently. I might be having different statuses to allow us to say truly backlogged, not getting this anytime soon, versus some of my other items here, like thing 6 is in my backlog folder, but is kind of ready to be worked on, if you will. So this allows me to identify and differentiate between stuff that's like pipe dream 6 months from now versus the stuff I should be actually looking at as I'm getting ready for the upcoming, say, sprint 4 in this case.
Question there for you, Brett.
Mm-hmm.
So with that status in the backlog folder, is that a different workflow altogether that you've got applied for that particular folder? Is it a
up to you
backlog workflow, or how have you done that?
Yeah, so I have this as a custom workflow here, space level workflow for me. And so I have a backlog status in my deferred status group, and I have my not started at the beginning. Now, many of you, as you kick off your knowledge-based space template, it's likely going to default to your default workflow. We try not to put too many custom workflows and accounts from those knowledge space templates. But so you're probably going to see it under your default workflow, I believe. But you could customize those and change them. And again, this is not anything standard that I've seen. These are just some of the different options I've seen for custom workflows within Agile use cases. And I've seen, again, dozens of other examples, but this is kind of some of the big stuff I like to see. I always like to see a blocked. I prefer not started to new because this implies we haven't even gotten to it yet. I like to have an in progress to differentiate between those we haven't even started working on and have started working on but are not done. I don't know, paused or active. I haven't seen those too often, but occasionally. And again, backlog down here really doesn't need to be called backlogged since we have a backlog folder. This is more just something that differentiates between the work that's hasn't started but is ready to be started and the stuff that is likely not getting to anytime soon and that you maybe don't want on your report to show up as an active status or to be able to just not send notifications about, et cetera, et cetera. There's a few examples of benefits from things that are not in an active status, such as backlog down here being under completed.
I might be getting ahead of myself here, but when it comes to backlog grooming, I guess, is that something that you could do with a set of statuses, or kind of how would you determine what comes out of backlog?
So I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I do want to, let's use that to kind of jump over and just call out briefly. We're going to spend more time on these on Thursday sessions, but I have a number of custom fields here. And again, you would never use all of these in conjunction, but these are used kind of examples I've seen used over the years for how teams determine what to, how to kind of groom their backlog folder, if you will. Some teams do like a work breakdown structure where they're actually giving a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 all the way down to 100, and as far as order of preference. Many teams do more t-shirt sizing. I would think of this as kind of t-shirt, well, maybe not t-shirt sizing as far as effort, but this is just a priority of, urgent, 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 next up, next up, next up. I see story points done, whether that's a drop down using like a Fibonacci sequence like this, or just a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, like I have in the numerical priority over here. And there's some reasons we have this done differently, I'll talk about in a second. I've seen teams do just effort. If you're not using story points, if you're not using any sort of prioritization, or maybe in conjunction with the prioritization, we still have how much work it's going to take, how much effort we are assuming. And this could be done in the backlog. It could be done as part of the current sprint or during the sprint planning typically. But it's done early on so that we have the ability to kind of plan out accordingly. And the last part here I wanted to call out, again, we'll talk a little bit more about this next time, but by adding a numerical value here in a priority like this, where I'm not just calling out with a drop down, but rather a, sorry, my little toddler is upset he can't get into my office right now. We have our numerical values right here, and we can do a formula to multiply across these. So this allows us to see the amount of effort, the level of effort, if you will, and the urgency or importance or weighted value, if you will, and multiply those to get a weight. And we can use this to determine something. And like the way I've kind of done it here is the higher the priority, the lower the number, the more effort here, the more effort here, and then multiplied across. This gives you a sense that like, oh, this is probably the lowest hanging fruit we should take on, right? It has the lowest number because the lowest priority or the highest priority, I should say, just inverse. With effort here. And you could do this in any other way, right? You could look for a higher number and have the higher priority as your number there. But the idea is to be able to do a weighted formula here. In this case, I'm just doing a multiplication across those two values here, getting the answer and allowing that to determine, oh, this is low priority and a lot of work. Maybe we do this one later. So that can help with the kind of prioritization and determining what goes into the sprint. Well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, though. We'll get into that next session.
Thanks, Brett. I guess like I said, I think I might be getting ahead of myself, but your kid wants your young one wants priority, and I was going to say, I think the I think the call out here is that we're very versatile in which way you want to choose to go about it, right? Yeah. It's a case of choose your kind of best method, or choose what works best for you, and then implement accordingly, I guess, right?
Agreed. Yes, there's lots of different ways. This will tie into our analytics down the road. Based on how you're doing it. Again, we're not here to necessarily change the behavior of your organization. If you use story points, great. We can use story points. There's pros and cons to all of these, as there is with all sorts of project management and work management. But the idea here is we can do a lot of different options. For the sake of time, though, I do want to move on here. So we have our epics. We've cross-tagged everything in the backlog. I find that this varies. Some teams like to build their next sprint directly in the backlog. Some teams build it in the upcoming current sprint folder, up to you. But the idea here is as we are getting ready for sprint 4, I like a view like this because as I determine, okay, right here, thing 11, low effort, high, a high priority, a low weight, if you will, we can just simply drag that up and put it into sprint 4 with thing 11, now going right up here into sprint 4. So if we're planning on taking them on, we move them up, and then eventually once we're ready, we can move, once we're done with sprint 3 during, say, our sprint review or retrospectives, we move sprint 3 down into the completed bucket, and we can move sprint 4 down into the current bucket. Now, as a quick call out, I always like to have these permanent folders here. So you don't have to have a folder called current sprint. Typically, you're only going to have one sprint ever living within here. However, what I like to do is I like to have this current sprint folder because this allows me to tie all of my reports, my dashboards, my custom views like I have here in my backlog with my backlog table here. It allows us to tie those permanent kind of views or tools, like again, dashboards, reports, etc., to my backlog folder or to my current sprint folder. That way, it doesn't matter which sprint lives inside of current sprint. It just, my reports, my dashboards will always see whether it's sprint 3, sprint 4, sprint 5. They're always going to see whatever lives in there currently. And you don't have to go back into your reports every week or every 2 weeks and change it. Okay, we've moved on from sprint 3. Now let's change our filter to sprint 4. Now let's change it to sprint 5. If you don't have a permanent folder like this, it just means every week you got to go in and update all your filters and look at the next sprint in line. Same thing, you might have to rebuild your custom tables if you have a custom table like I do here with one of our custom views, or like additional views if you like to have a backlog table that shows everything, and a ready table that just shows the stuff that you need to start assigning out, or only the tasks that are actually you are planning on adding to the next couple of sprints, stuff like that. So I like to have those more permanent folders, and then within those folders, we can actually jump into the specific sprints, something along this line here. Alex, I don't see any questions in Q&A, but again, if anybody does have any questions, please throw them in the chat. I want to make sure we get to everybody. All right.
Yeah, nothing just yet, Brett, but I'll keep you updated. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, nothing just yet, but I'll keep you updated.
Thank you. Okay, so we move all of our stuff into sprint 4. We add a few more tasks maybe. Again, I usually like to operate out of my backlog folder so I can just kind of see the whole big picture. Maybe we go, okay, and thing 9 is going to come in as well. Let's add that. Okay, we've got our list of things here. And now we move, say, sprint 4 into current sprint. Now I'm going to leave sprint 4 alone because I want to keep it as is for right now, but I'm going to jump into our sprint 3, which was the most recent sprint I was working on. And looks like it got messed up here, but I might have copied and pasted something. Now in sprint 3, you can see these are some of the things we are currently working on. It's some of the things have been assigned out already. We have this one with Han Solo. We have, some of these with Clint Eastwood, etc. Now, how you assign these out, again, we'll talk a little bit more during our next session, but the idea is, you're using those effort levels, you're using those, story points, etc., to kind of see who can take on what. I prefer effort. It just makes more sense in my brain. 40 hours over 2 weeks is 40 hours. I know that that's half my time minus the meetings that we should account for and whatnot, but it's just easier for me. I would say generally speaking, Wrike works a little bit better around effort, since then we could actually use some of our other tools that are built around effort, like workload charts. But story points works. If I know I can take on, 21 story points this sprint or something, we can sort in our upcoming new table view enhancement. We can sort by people and sum things up in those story points. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about those on our next one. But we can sum things up. I would say you probably want to use a numerical value. Drop downs don't sum up quite the same way. But if you had a numerical value like we did here in the backlog, you can actually sum that up quite easily and show everything we need.
Right.
Now,
got a question in backlog.
Mm-hmm.
With regards to dates, there was someone said that I see there's the date attributed to the tasks in the sprint.
Yes.
Do they still matter if it's just sitting in a sprint?
Good question. Most Scrum teams, at least in particular that I've seen, don't add dates to things. In my experience, I was wondering why I was saying something. I was in my old version. Here we go. Most teams do not necessarily add dates. That said, especially in the backlog, you typically are not adding dates. Now, once you move it into the current sprint, I'd say probably the most common, and again, this varies a ton, is that we just set the sprint. If the sprint started today and goes to, next or to the next Tuesday, 2 weeks like that, we might have here. Let me just do it where I can actually count it and see it. So maybe it starts on Tuesday the 10th and ends on the 23rd. Usually just the project, the sprint itself has dates. I generally speaking don't see dates for the individual tasks. That said, you absolutely can. And so some teams that are kind of more of a hybrid style will do that because they're kind of operating the overall project has dates and is more waterfall style, but the development section is more agile. We'll get to that in the hybrid section later on or on Thursday session. But the idea here is, again, like you could have dates there. Usually that's only if you're doing actual dependencies within the sprint. So I need to get, feature 8 done in the first week of the sprint so we can work on feature 9 in the second half. In those cases, we'll typically add dates during the backlog planning. Generally speaking, though, I would not have dates in here, and I think I probably just have this from an old example. I've been repurposing this for a long time, so I might just remove or clear the dates in this case. Fair question. We'll maybe talk about that a little bit more during the hybrid section. All right, but we have assignments out. We do our assignments. We work through our work. We mark our work complete. Each individual has their own tasks assigned to them. We're going to have dashboards we'll go over next time that can kind of show what everybody's working on. We'll have a stand-up dashboard that we can use during our stand-up meetings to kind of highlight blocking issues or just everything going on. And then once we are completed with our work, we do our sprint review, we do our sprint retrospective, we move it down here into the completed sprints again. And I'm just kind of trying to walk through the big structure before we get into the details a little bit more, but we move it down here and it can live forever in our completed sprint section. Now, something I haven't called out yet, and you can see here, this is kind of a good example, is that I see here sprint 1 was completed. I see my little thumbs up emoji. Sometimes teams like to use the did it pass or did it fail, X for fail. You can use little Unicode emojis or just copy and paste any emoji in here to be able to see those. And you'll see this 75%, but what might also be throwing you off is that we have 100% completed. And I'm going to get a little bit more into this again later, but want you to understand what's happening here. Sometimes we don't finish our tasks in the sprint, but we still need to get that task done. We have options to handle this, right? So let's say it was feature 9, I can tell because I'll talk about that in a reason. Let's say we didn't finish feature 9 as part of sprint 1, but we still need to get it done later. We might not want to lose history that this was a part of sprint 1 at one point. So we could just drag and drop it, move it to the backlog, move it to the next sprint 2 or sprint 3 or so on. But what I like to do is I like to cross tag this. That way you can see that this task lived in sprint 1. It might have gone, I think what happened in this case is it went back to the backlogged folder at some point. Yeah, you can see moved right here, backlog folder. Moved to the backlog folder because we didn't finish it as part of sprint 1. We didn't end up taking it on in sprint 2, but we did end up taking it on in sprint 3. And so essentially what happened is it's tagged into Epic 3. It's tagged into sprint 1. It used to be tagged into backlog, but then when I dragged and dropped it or moved it from backlog into sprint 3, we removed the old backlog tag, but it keeps the sprint 1 tag. So now I have a historical reference that this is part of Epic 3, was originally part of sprint 1, and is now part of sprint 3. This gets a little bit into the weeds here, and we'll talk about a few other options, but this is intentional just in order to be able to show that history. And going back to a moment ago, the 75% was what we tracked completed at the initial ending sprint review, sprint retrospective of sprint 1, which we wanted to store here, either here or sometimes in a custom field down here. That way we can still see for reviews of sprints in the future, where did we end up at even after feature 9 has been marked complete later on a couple sprints down the road. So this one, again, a little bit more confusing in advance, but is necessary. And I want you to know there's a few options there. We'll talk more about that on our next session.
Gotcha. That was going to actually be one of my questions, Brett. I was going to say, what are the kind of pros and cons that kind of come with those options? But I reckon we'll park that.
Yeah, time permitting, we can get into that, Alex, but let's hold off for next session.
Sounds good. And there was going to be another question on, do you actually complete the sprint? So, yeah.
I think yes. I think I have this for, again, I've been messing with this for years, but generally speaking, you would have, not only would you mark it complete, but you might have a different set of statuses for your sprints than you do for your Agile. So in this case, Agile might be for the tasks. Pretty common to have a different workflow for your Agile projects or your sprints, whether that's green, yellow, red, whether that's, there's, I don't know, I've seen dozens of different, here you go, in planning, in progress, in review, completed, failed, things like that. You could also have different statuses for. Really, the statuses are just for you to be able to filter differently. So if you needed to be able to see, for example, in a report at a quick glance, how many of my sprints completed, how many of my sprints completed that were failed, you might utilize these. You might utilize a custom field. You might utilize just a visible sign, depending on kind of what your needs are. We'll talk a little bit about progress down on our next session. But yeah, generally speaking, I would say, yes, you do mark the status completed, and you would mark it failed in this case, or something along those lines, depending on your preferences.
Got it. Thanks for that, Brett.
No problem. Okay, now I did want to call out, I also have this sprint template here. And this is typically used as what we duplicate to create sprint 5, sprint 6, sprints, all of our sprints, right? So it doesn't have to be like this. This is a super basic example, but you might have all of the information you go over during sprint planning, any notes you have. If, let's say, right at the beginning, you go over time off. I remember this was a big thing for us, is we assumed, I think, like 15 hours per sprint to meetings or something along those lines. So we had a 65-hour bucket of available time. But if you had PTO you were taking, if you were, leaving for an afternoon for a doctor's appointment or whatever, we would call those out and get our numbers kind of lower down. And we would often call that out in our notes here. Things like goals, obviously, the sprint start dates, you don't really need that down here. I would say it makes more sense to put that into one of our field values, our start date and due date or something up top. But the idea is whatever information you're going over during your sprint planning, your sprint review, your sprint retrospectives, you typically want those in one template. I do see sometimes you break this down and we'll have the overall sprint notes, and sometimes there's tasks within that sprint template for sprint planning tasks, sprint, notes or whatever. But retrospectives, I typically like to simplify and not overly use tasks, subtasks, etc. So I like to have just one little project template here that we can utilize to duplicate and create our upcoming sprints. All right. Any other questions there, Alex? I did see a couple in Q&A, but I don't know if it looks like they got answered actually a while back.
No, they've come out of the backlog and been pushed through.
All right. The next couple of last things to just kind of call out. There's no right or wrong here, but there's a lot of custom fields we're typically going to use. We're gonna dive into those more. Things like those effort, the story points, the risks. Where do you add in risks? Does this feature itself become a risk? Often we do use a status for something like that, at risk. So we can call it out. We use something like blocked for our stand-up meetings, maybe as our call out, especially like I remember in a lot of my stand-up meetings, we're trying to keep them quick. And so you don't need to go over everything that's going fine, right? You only want to go over the things that your Scrum Master, your Agile coach can work with you to kind of clear up. That might be a good use of blocked. We're going to talk automations on our next session as well. And one of those automations might be, as soon as you mark your status blocked, or anybody on your, say, Scrum team marks a task blocked, your Scrum Master automatically gets a notification saying, hey, this task is blocked, take a look at it. Things like that can be really useful. We can use automations for our sprints, so that, going back to Alex's question from earlier, when we mark that sprint complete, it automatically moves it down into the completed sprints folder, or automatically notifies, your epic, whoever is the epic associated or something along those lines, so that they know, hey, the current sprint closed. You can look at the notes from this current sprint or something. So we'll talk a little bit more about custom fields. We'll talk on our next one. We'll talk a little bit more about automations. We'll talk a little bit more about some cross-tagging stuff here and different variations, both of kind of this basic structure as well as what we would call a hybrid structure, which is a little bit more of a waterfall style approach in general, with the development section typically being broken down into epics that are then also tagged into our sprint section. This one's, again, a little bit more complex. We'll start with that probably on our next session, and then go into, again, some of those automations and custom fields, and a little bit more of kind of the tactical, logistical navigation of how we kind of work around. So I think that's going to be it. We have 5 more minutes left technically, but I think we wanted to hand over to Alex as well for a few final notes. So with that, over to you, Alex.
Yeah, look, Brett, before I actually do hand it back over to me, I think there's a question on retrospectives. Is that something that you'd like to kind of take care of today, or do you want to handle that on our next call?
Retrospectives are so different case by case in my experience. I've seen it done where teams don't even do a retrospective the same way as like we used to. We had a sprint review and into a retrospective, and our retrospectives were more like, the review was more focused on what actually happened in those 2 weeks, the retrospective on what went right, what went wrong, what can we improve. I'm finding teams moving away from that generally, and more so they just kind of merge those 2 meetings. Either way, the concepts are sort of the same. We have our sprints templates. We have our right here, whether you wanted to have some retrospective notes down here and, putting into the, whatever it is that you'd like to cover as your kind of template, of like, here's what went right, what went wrong. Teams often I'm finding are more, the reason they're kind of going away from that, at least in Wrike, is that you can use your comments throughout to kind of talk about what's going on. And I think teams are a little bit more in tune, because the nature of Wrike making this a little bit more collaborative than when we were all working kind of in silos at our desks, with maybe the only interaction being, when I had a question, or during our stand-up meetings, things along those lines. So I don't know. I don't know if there was a specific question. I'd love to hear it a little bit more. I don't have any real specific notes on retrospectives. Again, if I've seen 50 teams using Wrike for Agile methodologies, I've probably seen 52 different ways of doing retrospectives.
Got it. Thanks for that, Brett. Well, I haven't got any other questions here at this point, and at which point I kind of, asked to take control of the screen, I guess, if I could.
All yours.
And so, yes, thank you very much. If there are any questions, please flick them through. Now's a good time to kind of put them in the Q&A section there. Maria and Brett will certainly try to answer them. But while that's kind of happening, wanted to make you aware of the fact that there are a bunch of resources available around you. There is, of course, our support team, right? And I say this every time. They're there to kind of help you out with any questions you might have around, hey, I can't do this for whatever reason. I could log in yesterday and now I can't. For whatever reason, this custom field is, whatever it might be, they're there to help you out in that regard. They can also point you towards other resources as well, such as customer success managers who are there to ensure that you see value out of the platform every single day. There's Wrike Discover, which I hope you know about, because it's probably how you got here in the first place, to understand how to actually use the platform. There's a bunch of courses, a variety of different ways to understand how to use different functionality on Wrike. There's, of course, the help page and the community forum, a great spot to share your ideas, a great spot to learn of other people from the Wrike community. And of course, last but not least, there's your account manager, who's usually there from an account and billing perspective, and usually there to kind of also help you put you in touch with the likes of Wrike Professional Services. If you come out of the session today a little bit confused, or feeling like you potentially don't have the time to kind of set all this up, or you'd like to get a bit more learn more about it, the likes of Brett can kind of help you out to put this all together, right? They're experts in their fields. Brett's been doing this for a while. He gets it. He knows how to put this together, and he's worked with a variety of different customers to understand how to put together a solution. They're there to ensure that you streamline your workflows and get better efficiency. And at the end of the day, see ROI, get rapid results, and get your return on investment much sooner. Our professional services team get greater adoption when folks go through their service. Okay. Now, Brett, is there anything else that I'm missing here? Is there anything else that I should take note of the fact from PS?
Yeah, there's all sorts of different types of packages we have, from brand new teams starting from scratch to teams that just need a little help with a new process. Like if you've moved from previously, waterfall more style approach to Agile, and you need help with reconfiguring, we can help with that. As well as there are teams that are, just want us to come in, take a look through their system, help find inefficiencies where we can add automations, things along those lines. So there's lots of different options for you. I did see in chat a question: how do we contact our customer success manager, professional services consultant? You'll only have a consultant assigned if you've purchased professional services as to go with your account. You're going to probably need to find your account manager and reach out to them, and they can help put you in touch with, what your options are for PS. As far as your customer success manager, also reach out to your account manager. They might be your customer success manager, or sometimes we have dedicated separately, but it depends on the situation. So I don't know if Alex, you have any additional to add to that.
No, I think you've answered that perfectly, Brett. Really appreciate it. And look, I guess on that note, Brett, thank you so very much. Really appreciate you going through this first part of this two-part session. And of course, keep an eye out for part 2 coming up in a couple of days, where we'll finish off a lot of this. And of course, if you have any kind of questions between now and then, keep note. We'll try to answer them throughout the next session, of course. I hope that's inspired folks. I hope that's got some people excited about their Wrike environment and putting together an agile work structure in their Wrike solution. And of course, we'll see you in a couple of days. Brett, thank you so very much. Maria, thank you so very much. Really appreciate you both.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Talk to you on Thursday.
Yeah.